Clint Eastwood faces arrest. Pam Bondi's surprise move shocks the judge. Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clint Eastwood's sprawling property in Carmel by the sea. Birds sang in the pine trees as the legendary filmmaker and actor sat on his wooden porch. He wore a simple gray sweater and khaki pants, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. At 94 years old, his face showed the lines of a life lived fully, each wrinkle telling a story of triumph and struggle in Hollywood. This quiet morning routine had become sacred to Eastwood. After decades of making movies, directing award-winning films, and serving as the mayor of this very town, he had earned this peace. He gazed out at the ocean view, planning his day. He needed to review a new script his assistant had sent over and call his daughter about Sunday dinner. The ringing phone broke his calm. Eastwood glanced at the caller ID and saw it was Alan Morris, his attorney of 30 years. Something about the early hour of the call made him frown. "Alan," Eastwood answered, his voice carrying the familiar gravelly tone that had become his trademark. "You're up early." "Clint, we have a situation," Alan said. The tension in his voice was clear even through the phone. "There's been a complaint filed against you about that historical building from the film shoot last year." Eastwood set his coffee down slowly. "What kind of complaint?" "A serious one. They're saying you damaged protected historical property. Pam Bondi has been named special prosecutor on the case." "Pam Bondi, the former attorney general?" Eastwood's eyes narrowed. Why would she take interest in a property dispute? Alan's sigh carried through the phone. "That's what worries me. This feels political, Clint. They're demanding you appear in court next Monday. They're talking about criminal charges." Eastwood stood up, walking to the edge of his porch. The beautiful day now seemed less bright. "This is ridiculous. We had all the proper permits. Jack Baker from the Historical Society was on set every day. He signed off on everything we did." "I know that. You know that. But Bondi is making a show of this. The press is already gathering outside the courthouse. It's becoming a circus." Eastwood felt a flash of anger, then pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help now. "What do they claim we did?" "They say your crew removed original fixtures from the Manning house during filming. They claim those fixtures were protected under the Historical Preservation Code and that you personally ordered their removal." "That's not what happened," Eastwood said firmly. "We temporarily removed some fixtures to prevent damage during filming. Everything was documented, photographed, and put back exactly as it was. Better than it was, actually. We even paid to have some of the older pieces restored." "I believe you, but we need to gather all that documentation. I'll need the paperwork from the Historical Society, any emails, the before and after photographs, everything." Eastwood nodded, though Alan couldn't see him. "I'll have Betty send everything over from the production office today." "Good. And Clint, don't talk to anyone about this, not the press, not friends, no one. This could get messy." After ending the call, Eastwood walked inside his house to his office. His housekeeper, Maria, noticed his serious expression. "Is everything okay, Mr. Eastwood?" she asked. "Just some business to take care of, Maria," he replied, not wanting to worry her. In his office, Eastwood called Betty Green, his production manager for the past 15 years. "Betty, I need everything we have on the Manning House restoration. Every permit, every photo, every email." Betty, efficient as always, didn't ask questions. "I'll have it all to you by noon." As Eastwood hung up, his cell phone buzzed with a text from Richard Carter, a fellow director and old friend. "Just saw the news. What's going on? Call me." So, it was already in the news. Eastwood turned on the television in his office and flipped to a news channel. Sure enough, there was a reporter standing outside the San Francisco federal courthouse. Hollywood legend Clint Eastwood is facing potential criminal charges related to the alleged destruction of protected historical property during the filming of his latest project. Former Attorney General Pam Bondi has been appointed special prosecutor in the case. Sources close to the investigation suggest Eastwood could face up to 3 years in prison if convicted. Eastwood shook his head in disbelief. 3 years? For properly documented restoration work? This was clearly about something else. His phone rang again. This time it was his son, Kyle. "Dad, I just saw the news. I'm coming over." "No need, Kyle. I'm fine. Alan is handling it." "I'm not asking, Dad. I'll be there in an hour." Eastwood smiled slightly. His son had inherited his stubbornness. While waiting for Kyle, Eastwood received an email from Susan Miller, an actress who had worked with him on several films. The subject line read simply, "I've got your back." The email read, "Clint, I just made a statement to the press defending you. This is clearly a witch hunt. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Your friend always, Susan." Eastwood felt a wave of gratitude for his friends in the industry. He had always tried to treat people with respect throughout his long career, and moments like this showed the value of those relationships. Kyle arrived just as Betty sent over the files about the Manning house. Eastwood and his son spent the afternoon going through everything, organizing it for Alan. "This is solid, Dad," Kyle said, reviewing the documentation. "Look at these sign-offs from the Historical Society. They even thanked you for the restoration work." Eastwood nodded. "The question is, why is Bondi pushing this when the evidence is so clear?" Kyle looked thoughtful. "You publicly supported her opponent in the last election. That was years ago, and politics shouldn't enter into the justice system." "Shouldn't, but it does," Kyle replied. As evening fell, Alan arrived to collect the documentation and brief Eastwood on what to expect on Monday. "Judge Frank Thompson will be presiding," Alan explained. "He's tough but fair, doesn't like media circuses." "Good," Eastwood said. "Neither do I." "The hearing is set for 9 in the morning. I'll pick you up at 7. We'll go in through the parking garage to avoid the worst of the press." After Alan left, Eastwood sat alone in his living room. The house felt too big, too quiet. He thought about calling his ex-wife Dina or his daughter Francesca, but decided against it. No need to worry them until he knew more. Instead, he pulled out the script he had planned to read earlier. The new project was a courtroom drama about an innocent man facing a biased system. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally he wouldn't answer, but something told him to take this call. "Eastwood," he answered. "Mr. Eastwood, you don't know me," a man's voice said. "My name is Henry Powell. I was the set designer on your Manning house shoot. I remember you, Henry. What can I do for you?" "It's more what I can do for you, sir. I have information about Ms. Bondi and why she's coming after you, and I have proof that the photographs they're using have been altered." Eastwood sat up straighter. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that could stop this case before it really starts. I'll be at the courthouse on Monday. I just wanted you to know you have allies." As Eastwood ended the call, he felt the first hint of hope since this ordeal began. Perhaps this wouldn't be as one-sided as it appeared. He looked out the window at the stars appearing over the Pacific Ocean. In his long career, he had faced critics, box office failures, and public scrutiny. This was just another challenge to overcome. And if there was one thing Clint Eastwood knew how to do, it was stand his ground. Monday morning arrived with dark clouds hanging over San Francisco. It was as if the weather itself knew what was coming. Clint Eastwood stood at his hotel window, already dressed in a navy blue suit. He had barely slept. The clock showed 6:15 a.m., but he had been up since 4, reviewing his statement with Alan one last time over the phone. A soft knock came at the door. It was Kyle, also in a suit. "Ready, Dad?" Kyle asked, his face showing concern. Eastwood nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." They rode the elevator down in silence. In the hotel lobby, Eastwood spotted several people with cameras pretending to be guests. He kept his face blank as he and Kyle walked quickly to the waiting black SUV. Alan Morris sat inside, his briefcase open on his lap. "Morning, Clint," Alan said, handing him a coffee. "We have a small problem. Judge Thompson has denied our motion to dismiss." Eastwood took the coffee but didn't drink it. "So we're going to trial?" "Not yet. Today is just the formal charging, but Thompson wants to hear the evidence before making any decisions." The SUV pulled into the courthouse parking garage 15 minutes later. Even here, photographers waited. Flashes went off as Eastwood stepped out of the car. "Mr. Eastwood, did you order the destruction of the Manning house?" one reporter shouted. "How do you respond to Pam Bondi's statement that no one is above the law?" called another. Eastwood said nothing. Kyle put a hand on his father's shoulder as they walked toward the elevator. Alan led the way, pushing reporters back. "No questions at this time," Alan said firmly. The courthouse hallway was packed with people trying to get into courtroom 4C. Many held phones up, filming as Eastwood walked by. A court officer escorted them to the front, where they took seats at the defense table. Across the aisle, Pam Bondi sat reviewing papers. She wore a bright red suit that stood out in the wood-paneled room. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun. When she noticed Eastwood, she gave a small, confident smile. At exactly 9 o'clock, a side door opened. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Frank Thompson," the bailiff called. Judge Thompson was a tall man with silver hair and thick glasses. He moved quickly to the bench and sat down, looking out over the packed courtroom with clear disapproval. "Be seated," he said. "Let me make something clear before we begin. This is a court of law, not a movie set. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. That includes taking photos or videos." He stared pointedly at several people in the gallery who quickly put their phones away. "Now, we are here in the matter of California versus Eastwood. Ms. Bondi, you may proceed." Pam Bondi stood gracefully. "Thank you, Your Honor. The state wishes to formally charge Mr. Clint Eastwood with willful destruction of protected historical property under Federal Code 1532, Section B. This is a serious offense carrying a potential 3-year sentence." Murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Thompson banged his gavel once. "The Manning house, built in 1873, is one of the last remaining examples of early California Spanish colonial architecture," Bondi continued. "Mr. Eastwood's film company obtained permits to film there, but those permits clearly stated no alterations could be made to the structure." She walked toward the bench, holding up several photographs. These photos, taken by a crew member, show Mr. Eastwood personally instructing workers to remove original fixtures from the building. These fixtures, including hand-carved door frames and original wall sconces, were over 150 years old and protected by law. Bondi placed the photos on the evidence table. "Given the seriousness of these charges and Mr. Eastwood's considerable resources, we request the defendant surrender his passport and remain within state lines pending trial." Judge Thompson nodded. "Mr. Morris, your response?" Allen stood quickly. "Your Honor, these charges are completely without merit. We have documentation proving that all temporary alterations to the Manning house were approved by the Historical Society. Every item removed during filming was cataloged, preserved, and returned to its original location." He pulled out a thick folder. "I have signed permits, daily inspection reports, and letters of approval from Jack Baker, the head of historical preservation, who was on set every day." Bondi interrupted. "Your Honor, Mr. Baker has provided a statement saying he never approved the removal of original fixtures. He claims Mr. Eastwood's team exceeded the scope of their permits." Allen frowned. "That directly contradicts the signed documents we have, Your Honor." Judge Thompson looked irritated. "I'll review both sets of documents. In the meantime—" "Your Honor," Eastwood said suddenly, standing up. "May I speak?" Allen grabbed his arm, whispering, "Clint, I advise against this." Judge Thompson looked surprised. "Mr. Eastwood, you're represented by counsel. It's unusual for defendants to speak at this stage." "I understand that, Your Honor," Eastwood said in his gravelly voice. "But I've spent my life standing up for what's right. I can't sit quietly when I'm being falsely accused." The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped writing to listen. Judge Thompson studied Eastwood for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, Mr. Eastwood. You may speak." Eastwood straightened his shoulders. "Your Honor, I've been making films for over 60 years. In that time, I've filmed at hundreds of historical locations. I have never, not once, damaged or destroyed historical property. In fact, my production company has donated millions to historical preservation." He pointed at the photographs on the evidence table. "Those pictures don't show the whole story. We did temporarily remove some fixtures, but only to protect them during filming. We had expert conservators on site. Every item was carefully documented, stored in climate-controlled conditions, and then returned and restored. Eastwood looked directly at Bondi. Ms. Bondi knows this. She has the full documentation. She also knows that we spent $300,000 of our own money restoring damaged elements of the Manning house that had nothing to do with our filming. The building is in better condition now than before we arrived. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom suddenly swung open with a loud creak. All heads turned to see who had caused the interruption. A thin man with glasses and a worn, brown suit walked slowly down the center aisle. He carried a leather satchel and looked nervous but determined. "Your Honor," the man called out. "My name is Henry Powell. I was the set designer on Mr. Eastwood's film. I have information that is critical to these proceedings." Judge Thompson's face darkened with anger at the interruption. "Sir, this is a courtroom, not a theater. You can't simply walk in and interrupt proceedings." "I apologize, Your Honor," Powell said, still walking forward. "But after seeing the news yesterday, I realized I had to come. The photographs Ms. Bondi is using as evidence have been altered." A loud gasp went through the courtroom. Reporters began frantically taking notes. Bondi stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We have no idea who this man is or if his claims have any merit." Judge Thompson held up his hand for silence. "Bailiff, please escort Mr. Powell to my chambers. Ms. Bondi, Mr. Morris, you will join us." He turned to Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, please remain here with your son." As the judge and lawyers filed out, the courtroom erupted in excited conversation. Kyle leaned over to his father. "That was Powell, the guy who called you?" Eastwood nodded, watching as Powell followed the judge through the side door. "Let's hope he has what he says he has." For the next 45 minutes, Eastwood sat quietly in the courtroom as speculation swirled around him. Finally, the side door opened again. Judge Thompson returned, his face even more serious than before. Bondi followed, her earlier confidence, now replaced with visible concern. Alan came last, trying to hide a small smile. Judge Thompson called the court to order. "In light of new evidence presented to the court, I am calling a recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Mr. Eastwood, you are free to go, but please remain available to the court." As people began to leave, Alan hurried over to Eastwood. Powell came through. The photos were digitally altered. The original fixtures were never damaged. Thompson is furious with Bondi. Eastwood nodded, relief washing over him. "What happens now?" Alan gathered his papers. "We come back tomorrow." But things just got much more interesting for Ms. Bondi. As they walked out of the courtroom, Eastwood spotted Powell standing alone in the hallway. He walked over and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming forward." Powell shook his hand nervously. "It was the right thing to do, Mr. Eastwood, but—" He lowered his voice. "This goes deeper than you know. Ms. Bondi isn't working alone." "What do you mean?" Eastwood asked. "Not here," Powell whispered. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Eastwood nodded, suddenly understanding that today's events were just the beginning of something much bigger. The private meeting with Henry Powell took place in a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. Eastwood sat in a corner booth with Kyle and Alan, while Powell nervously tapped his fingers against his coffee cup. The shop was nearly empty at this hour, giving them the privacy they needed. "Start from the beginning," Eastwood said to Powell. His voice was calm, but his eyes showed his intensity. Powell took a deep breath. "I worked as set designer on the Manning House project. My job was to make sure we preserved everything properly while making the space work for filming." He opened his leather satchel and pulled out a folder. "These are the original photographs I took of the process. You can see dates and timestamps on each one." Alan took the photos and examined them carefully. "These clearly show the fixtures being carefully removed and stored with all proper protocols." Powell nodded. "Exactly. But that's not all." He lowered his voice. 2 weeks after filming wrapped, I got a strange call from Peter Johnson." "Who is Peter Johnson?" Kyle asked. "He's a property developer. He's been trying to buy the Manning house for years but couldn't because of its historical status. If the building lost its protected status due to damage, he could finally purchase it and tear it down for condos. Eastwood's eyes narrowed. And how does Bondi fit in? Johnson and Bondi are old friends. They went to law school together. But more importantly, Johnson is a major donor to Bondi's Political Action Committee. Powell pulled out his phone and showed them a series of text messages. Johnson contacted me offering $50,000 to adjust my documentation to show damage to the property. When I refused, he said he had someone else who would do it. Allen was writing furiously in his notebook. Do you have any direct evidence linking Bondi to Johnson in this particular matter? Powell hesitated. Not exactly, but I have something almost as good. He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. This contains the original digital photos alongside the altered ones Bondi presented in court. The metadata proves they were altered 2 weeks ago, and I managed to trace the editing software license to Johnson's company. Eastwood leaned back, processing this information. So Johnson wants the property and Bondi wants to score political points by taking down a high-profile figure who once opposed her. That's my theory, Powell said with a nod. But there's more. Jack Baker, the historical preservation officer, who supposedly claimed you exceeded your permits, he's been on vacation in Europe for the past month. I don't think he made any such statement. Allen's eyebrows shot up. If someone forged Baker's statement, that's a serious crime. It gets worse. Powell continued. I've been followed since I started looking into this. 2 days ago, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was taken, but my computer was tampered with. Kyle put a protective hand on his father's shoulder. Dad, this is getting dangerous. Eastwood remained calm. Why are you helping me, Henry? You're putting yourself at risk. Powell looked down at his hands. My father was a big fan of yours. But more than that, I believe in doing what's right. What they're doing isn't just wrong. It's corrupt. Eastwood reached across the table and shook Powell's hand. I won't forget this. Allen gathered the documents. I need to get these to my office immediately and make copies. We'll present everything to Judge Thompson tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Powell's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his face went pale. It's from my neighbor. Someone is at my apartment again right now. Eastwood made a quick decision. You'll stay at my hotel tonight. Kyle, go with Henry to get whatever he needs from his place. Take a different car and make sure you're not followed. He turned to Allen. Get those documents somewhere safe. Make multiple copies. Allen nodded. What will you do? I'm going to make a call to an old friend at the FBI. This goes beyond local corruption. Now, later that evening, Eastwood sat in his hotel suite looking out at the San Francisco skyline. His FBI contact, Bill Rogers, had agreed to look into the matter quietly. Kyle had successfully brought Powell to a different hotel under a false name, for safety. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Eastwood checked the peephole before opening it. It was Donna White, the court reporter from that morning's hearing. Mr. Eastwood, I'm sorry to disturb you, she said nervously. But I thought you should see this. She handed him a small recorder. I record all court proceedings as backup to my typing. I was reviewing today's session and noticed something odd when the judge called the recess. Eastwood invited her in and played the recording. He could hear the judge announcing the recess, but in the background, barely audible, was Bondi's voice. Johnson will be furious. Get him on the phone. Donna pointed at the recorder. That wasn't meant to be heard. Ms. Bondi whispered it to her assistant, but my recorder was still running. Eastwood looked at her with gratitude. Why are you giving this to me? Donna straightened her shoulders. My father was a judge for 30 years. He taught me that justice matters. What's happening to you isn't justice. After she left, Eastwood called Allen and told him about the recording. Allen was ecstatic. This is the direct link we needed. With this and Powell's evidence, we can prove conspiracy. There's something else, Eastwood said. My FBI contact ran a check on Johnson. He's under investigation for bribing officials in 3 other property deals. Bondi might not know she's tied herself to a sinking ship. The next morning, the courtroom was even more crowded than before. News of Powell's dramatic entrance had spread, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Eastwood sat calmly at the defense table, while Bondi looked tense and kept checking her phone. Judge Thompson entered and called the court to order. Before we proceed, I want to address the irregular events of yesterday. Mr. Powell's allegations are serious and require proper investigation. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened. A tall man in a dark suit walked in, followed by two others wearing FBI jackets. The man approached the bench and showed his credentials. Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Daniel Collins with the FBI. We have reason to believe this case involves federal crimes, including evidence tampering, conspiracy, and attempted bribery of federal officials. Bondi jumped to her feet. This is outrageous. The FBI has no jurisdiction here. Judge Thompson gave her a cold look. Sit down, Ms. Bondi. The FBI has jurisdiction over federal crimes, which these allegations certainly qualify as. He turned back to the agent. Please continue. Agent Collins nodded. We've been investigating Peter Johnson for some time. New. Evidence suggests his involvement in this case, possibly along with others. His eyes moved briefly to Bondi. This is a legal travesty, Bondi shouted, her composure finally breaking. You can't just come in here and— Ms. Bondi, Judge Thompson interrupted, his voice like ice. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Agent Collins, what are you requesting? We ask that these proceedings be temporarily halted while we complete our investigation. We're prepared to take custody of all evidence presented thus far. Judge Thompson considered for a moment, then nodded. Granted. This court will recess for 2 weeks to allow for the federal investigation. He looked directly at Bondi. And Ms. Bondi, I expect you to make yourself available to the FBI. Failure to cooperate will result in severe consequences. As the courtroom erupted in excited conversation, Eastwood remained seated, his face unreadable. Alan leaned over to him. This is unprecedented. It's not over yet, Eastwood replied quietly. Johnson has powerful friends. He won't go down without a fight. As if on cue, a well-dressed man entered the courtroom and approached Bondi. He whispered something in her ear that made her face drain of color. She looked up and locked eyes with Eastwood across the room. For the first time since this ordeal, Eastwood allowed himself a small smile. The tables had turned, and now Pam Bondi was the one facing serious trouble. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Eastwood, shouting questions. He raised a hand for silence. I've always believed in our justice system, he said simply. Today showed why. The truth always finds a way. As he walked to his waiting car, Eastwood knew the coming days would bring more challenges. But for now, he had won an important victory. Not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in playing by the rules. The 2 weeks following the FBI's dramatic courtroom intervention passed in a blur of activity. Clint Eastwood had returned to his Carmel home, instructed by his attorney to continue life as normally as possible. But normalcy was difficult to achieve when your name was splashed across every newspaper and news channel in the country. Eastwood sat in his living room, reading through the morning papers. Most headlines now focused on Pam Bondi rather than him. Former Attorney General under investigation. Bondi denies corruption allegations. Property developer Johnson arrested on multiple charges. The phone rang, interrupting his reading. It was Alan Morris. Good morning, Clint. Just wanted to update you before you see it on the news. Peter Johnson has agreed to cooperate with the FBI. Eastwood set down his coffee. What does that mean for us? It means he's giving them everything on Bondi to save himself. His lawyer called me this morning. Johnson is willing to testify that Bondi knew the photographs were altered, and that she deliberately pursued the case against you despite knowing you had followed all proper procedures. Why would she take such a risk? Eastwood asked, though he already suspected the answer. Politics, Alan said simply. She's planning to run for governor next year. Taking down someone of your stature would have given her campaign a huge boost. Plus, Johnson promised a 7-figure donation to her campaign fund once the Manning House deal went through. Eastwood shook his head. All this over a building. A very valuable piece of real estate, Alan corrected. And now there's another development. Greg Martinez from the San Francisco Chronicle has been investigating this story. He's discovered that Johnson tried this same scheme 5 years ago with another historical property. That case was quietly settled, but Martinez found the records. Has he published the story yet? Going to press tomorrow. His assistant Nancy Clark called to give us a heads up. They want a comment from you. Eastwood thought for a moment. Tell them I believe in the justice system and will let the facts speak for themselves. After hanging up, Eastwood walked out to his porch. The morning fog was just beginning to lift over the Pacific. His phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. Turning. On Channel 7 now. Eastwood went back inside and turned on the television. A breaking news banner ran across the bottom of the screen. Judge orders Bondi to surrender passport amid expanding investigation. The reporter stood outside the San Francisco courthouse. In a stunning development, Judge Frank Thompson has ordered former Attorney General Pam Bondi to surrender her passport after evidence suggested she might be planning to leave the country. Sources close to the investigation say Bondi booked a flight to the Cayman Islands scheduled for tomorrow morning. Eastwood watched with growing interest as the camera panned to show FBI agents escorting Bondi from the courthouse to a waiting car. Her face, usually composed for the cameras, now showed clear signs of stress and anger. The reporter continued. This comes after property developer Peter Johnson agreed to cooperate with federal authorities. Johnson was arrested 3 days ago on charges of evidence tampering, conspiracy, and attempted bribery in connection with the now dismissed case against filmmaker Clint Eastwood. The doorbell rang, pulling Eastwood away from the television. He opened the door to find Henry Powell standing there, looking much better than he had 2 weeks ago. Mr. Powell, Eastwood said, extending his hand. This is a surprise. I hope I'm not intruding, Powell said, shaking Eastwood's hand. I was in Monterey for a job interview and thought I'd stop by to see how you're doing. Eastwood invited him in. I just saw the news about Bondi. Seems things are moving quickly. Powell nodded as he took a seat in the living room. That's partly why I came. The FBI interviewed me again yesterday. They found something interesting on Johnson's computer. He had detailed files on 5 other historical properties around the state. Each file contained notes about the owner, potential weaknesses in the historical designation, and which officials might be helpful in changing the status. So this was a much bigger operation than just the Manning house, Eastwood said. Much bigger. And Bondi wasn't his only government contact. They found emails to at least 3 other officials in various departments. Powell leaned forward. But here's the really interesting part. One of the emails mentioned that Johnson needed to move quickly on the Manning house because another buyer is showing interest. The FBI thinks someone else wanted to preserve the building properly, which is why Johnson accelerated his plan and took the risk of going after you. Eastwood raised an eyebrow. Any idea who this other buyer was? Powell smiled. That's the best part. It was the Historical Cinema Foundation. Mary Davis's organization? The same. They wanted to buy the Manning house and turn it into a museum celebrating the history of film in California. When Johnson found out, he panicked and pushed Bondi to file charges against you immediately, hoping to damage the building's historical status before the foundation could make an offer. Eastwood shook his head in disbelief. All this deception over a museum. A museum that would have prevented Johnson from building luxury condos worth millions, Powell pointed out. As they talked, Eastwood's phone rang again. It was Mary Davis herself. Clint, have you seen the news? She asked without preamble. About Bondi? Yes, I was just discussing it with Henry Powell. Not just that. The Historical Society Board met this morning. They've unanimously voted to name the Manning house after you in recognition of your work preserving it. Eastwood was rarely caught off guard, but this surprised him. That's not necessary, Mary. It absolutely is. Without your careful work during filming, and then your fight to expose Johnson's scheme, we might have lost one of the most important historical buildings in the state. The Clint Eastwood house has a nice ring to it, don't you think? After ending the call, Eastwood relayed the news to Powell, who smiled broadly. That's perfect justice, Powell said. Johnson tried to use the building to ruin you, and now your name will be on it forever. Later that afternoon, Kyle arrived with lunch and more news. "Dad, you won't believe this. Bondi is trying to cut a deal with prosecutors. She's offering information on other officials involved in Johnson's schemes." Eastwood nodded thoughtfully. "How wide do you think this goes?" "Pretty wide, according to my contact at the FBI. Johnson has been working this angle for years, bribing officials, altering documents, finding legal loopholes to destroy historical properties for development." As they ate lunch on the porch, Eastwood's attorney called again. "Clint, Judge Thompson wants to see you in his chambers tomorrow at noon. It's informal, not a court appearance." "Did he say what it's about?" "No, but his clerk mentioned he wants to personally apologize for what happened in his courtroom." The next day, Eastwood arrived at the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid the press. Judge Thompson's chambers were quiet and dignified, with law books lining the walls and a large desk of polished oak. The judge stood as Eastwood entered. "Mr. Eastwood, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Eastwood sat across from the judge, who looked troubled. "I want to personally apologize for what happened in my courtroom," Thompson said. "The justice system failed you, and as the presiding judge, I bear responsibility for that." "You had no way of knowing the evidence was falsified, Your Honor," Eastwood replied. "Perhaps not initially, but I should have been more thorough before allowing the case to proceed." Thompson sighed. "I've been a judge for 27 years. I pride myself on spotting dishonesty. In this case, I missed it. We all make mistakes," Eastwood said simply. Thompson nodded. "Yes, but when judges make mistakes, innocent people suffer." He pulled a folder from his desk. "I wanted you to be the first to know. I've recommended formal disbarment proceedings against Ms. Bondi. She violated her oath as an attorney and abused her position of trust." Eastwood accepted the news with a nod. "And what about the Manning house?" "The historical designation has been permanently secured. No one will be able to challenge it again." Thompson allowed himself a small smile. "I understand they're naming it after you." "So I've heard," Eastwood said, still uncomfortable with the honor. As Eastwood left the courthouse, he found a small crowd of supporters waiting outside. They applauded as he emerged. Among them was Donna White, the court reporter whose recording had helped prove Bondi's connection to Johnson. She approached him with a smile. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm glad to see justice was done. Thanks to you," he replied. "Your courage made a difference." As Eastwood walked to his waiting car, he felt a sense of closure. The case that had threatened his reputation and freedom was now exposing corruption that had festered for years. Sometimes, he reflected, the right thing happens for the wrong reasons. Tomorrow, he would return to Carmel and finally get back to what he loved most, making films. But today he had witnessed something just as dramatic as any movie, the real-life triumph of truth over deception. 3 months had passed since the dramatic events in Judge Thompson's courtroom. The early morning sun filtered through the trees as Clint Eastwood stood on the steps of the Manning house, now officially renamed the Eastwood Historical Building. A small crowd had gathered for the reopening ceremony. Workers had spent weeks restoring the building to its original glory, with Eastwood personally overseeing many of the details. Mary Davis from the Historical Cinema Foundation stood beside him, clipboard in hand, checking final arrangements for the ceremony. "The mayor will speak first, then Judge Thompson, and then you'll cut the ribbon," she reminded him. Eastwood nodded, adjusting his tie slightly. He had never been comfortable with ceremonies, but this one felt important. It represented not just the preservation of history, but the triumph of truth over corruption. Alan Morris approached, shaking hands with several local officials as he made his way to Eastwood. "Morning, Clint. Quite a turnout." "Too many people," Eastwood replied with a small smile. "You should get used to it. The governor just arrived and I spotted 3 network news vans." Alan handed Eastwood a folded newspaper. "Thought you might want to see this before the ceremony." The headline read, "Bondi pleads guilty to corruption charges, faces 5 years." The article detailed how the former Attorney General had accepted a plea deal, admitting to evidence tampering, conspiracy, and abuse of office in exchange for a reduced sentence. "Johnson got 10 years, Alan added. The judge was particularly harsh with him since this wasn't his first offense. Eastwood folded the paper and handed it back. Justice works slowly, but it works. Kyle arrived with Henry Powell, who had been hired as a consultant for the building's restoration. Powell had become something of a local hero after his role in exposing the corruption scheme. "Dad, they're ready to start," Kyle said. Eastwood took his place near the podium as the mayor of San Francisco began the ceremony with a speech about historical preservation and integrity. Judge Thompson spoke next, his words carrying special weight given his role in the case. "This building stands as a reminder that our past deserves protection," Thompson said, looking directly at Eastwood, "and it also reminds us that the truth, no matter how obscured it might become, has a way of coming to light." When it was Eastwood's turn to speak, he kept his remarks brief, as was his style. "This building has stood for over 150 years. It's seen a lot of history, and now it's part of a new chapter. I'm honored by the name, but the real honor belongs to the people who built it and to those who fought to preserve it." As he cut the ribbon, applause erupted from the crowd. Photographers captured the moment, and Eastwood found himself thinking about how this story might have ended very differently if not for people like Powell and Donna White, who had the courage to come forward. After the ceremony, Eastwood gave a brief tour of the building to selected guests. The main hall had been transformed into a museum dedicated to the history of filmmaking in California, with a special exhibit featuring costumes and props from Eastwood's own films. Greg Martinez, from the San Francisco Chronicle, approached him during the tour. "Mr. Eastwood, my series on the Johnson-Bondi corruption scandal just won a regional journalism award. I couldn't have broken the story without your cooperation." "You did the hard work," Eastwood replied. "How's your assistant, Nancy?" "Nancy Clark? She got promoted. She's covering the state legislature now, keeping an eye on the new ethics laws that were passed after the scandal broke." Later, as the crowd thinned, Eastwood found a quiet moment with Mary Davis on the building's restored balcony overlooking the bay. The view was spectacular, the kind that reminded you why places like this needed protection. "Your foundation did a remarkable job," Eastwood said. "This place has never looked better." Mary smiled. "We had help. Your production company's donation covered most of the restoration costs." It seemed fitting. "After all, this building changed my life in ways I never expected. For the better, I hope," Mary said. "In the end, yes." Eastwood looked out at the water. It exposed corruption that might have continued for years. It brought good people together, and it's preserved something important for future generations. As the evening approached, Eastwood made his way downstairs to find Kyle talking with FBI agent Daniel Collins, who had led the investigation into Johnson and Bondi. "Mr. Eastwood," Collins said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on the building. It's a much better outcome than anyone could have predicted when this case started. Any news on the other officials involved in Johnson's schemes?" Eastwood asked. Collins nodded. "2 more arrests last week, a planning commissioner in Oakland and a zoning official in Sacramento. Johnson's records were very detailed. He kept files on everyone he bribed." "Not a smart criminal," Kyle commented. "Smart ones are harder to catch," Collins agreed. "But they all make mistakes eventually." As the last guests departed, Eastwood walked through the empty building with Kyle. The restoration had been faithful to the original design, while adding modern elements to make it functional as a museum. The old fixtures that had been at the center of the legal dispute now gleamed under carefully designed lighting. "What's next, Dad?" Kyle asked as they reached the main entrance. "I've been reading a script," Eastwood replied. "A courtroom drama, actually." Kyle laughed. "Haven't you had enough of courtrooms? This one's different. It's about a judge who discovers corruption in his own courthouse and has to decide between his career and doing what's right. Sounds familiar? The best stories usually have some truth in them." Outside, the sun was setting over San Francisco Bay. A small brass plaque beside the entrance caught Eastwood's eye. It read, "The Eastwood Historical Building, preserved by truth, protected by justice." Donna White, who had remained in touch with Eastwood since the trial, approached as they exited. What do you think of the plaque? I suggested the wording to the historical committee. It's perfect, Eastwood said sincerely. Donna smiled. My father always said that justice depends on people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. You did that, Mr. Eastwood. We all did, he corrected her. As they walked to their cars, Henry Powell joined them. I just got a call from my new boss at the Historical Society. They want me to head up a new program identifying at-risk historical properties around the state. A direct result of what happened here, Kyle noted. Powell nodded. Sometimes good things come from bad situations. The next morning, Eastwood returned to his Carmel home. The legal battle that had threatened his reputation and freedom was now fully resolved. Pam Bondi and Peter Johnson were facing years in prison. The Manning house, now bearing Eastwood's name, would stand for generations as a museum celebrating film history. As he sat on his porch with his morning coffee, much as he had been doing when this ordeal began, Eastwood reflected on the strange journey of the past few months. At 94 years old, he had faced one of the most challenging fights of his life and emerged victorious. His phone rang. It was Alan Morris. Clint, I just got a call from Universal. They want to make a movie about the Bondi Johnson scandal. They're calling it Truth and Justice for now. Eastwood chuckled. Who do they want to play me? They didn't say, but they want your input as a consultant. Tell them I'm busy working on my own film. After hanging up, Eastwood gazed out at the ocean. The story that had unfolded around him would make a good film. Conspiracy, corruption, and the triumph of truth. But some stories were better left to real life. A line from one of his old westerns came to mind. A man's got to know his limitations. But in this case, Eastwood had discovered that when people stand together for what's right, those limitations can be overcome. He picked up the script for his new film and began making notes. This time, the story wouldn't just be entertaining, it would remind people that justice, though sometimes slow and imperfect, was always worth fighting for.